You're welcome back. It is the first segment of AM Charts show this morning, and we're on to the newspaper review and analysis. And with us here we have our newspaper analyst, Mr. Shegun, Mr. Yemi Daniels. Who's with us this morning?
It's the song, I tell
Mr.
you.
Yemi Daniels, who's a social commentator and a political analyst. Mr. Yemi Daniels.
Good to be here again. I just wanted to add another name.
Don't mind me, he's the son.
Oh, yeah.
You're welcome. Mr. Daniels,
Yeah.
just before we go into our newspaper reviews, what is the state of the nation on your mind this morning? What are you thinking about our great nation, Nigeria?
I like that word, great nation.
It is a great nation.
And we just have to keep hope alive and just realize at the same time that nations are not built by sedentary citizens.
That's a new one.
It's not going to happen because we sit back in the comfort of our houses and we expect President Muhammad Buhari to turn things around all of a sudden. If we did not earn independence on the platter, and where democracy did not come to us on the platter, what makes us think that good governance will come on the platter? It will always be so.
That's a good line of thought.
We have 10 newspapers this morning, Anire. I have 5. I have on my beat, I have The Punch, The Nation, New Telegraph, The Authority, and the Nigerian News Direct.
And on my page, I have the Guardian newspaper, I have the Nigerian Tribune, I have the Daily Trust newspaper, Daily Sun, and of course the National Mirror newspaper this morning.
All right, so we kick it off with The Punch newspaper this morning, and the leading headline says, Kachuku blames fuel crisis on diversion to Cameroon charge. That story is on page 28 with the rider, FG plans to track fuel trucks, says a minister. On page 2, Fulani headsmen killed 20 raised church in Enugu community. An appeal court rejects motions to stop Saraki Dasuki Metu's trials. That story is on page 7. On page 19, arms scandal forced me out of PDP. This is credited to Yuguda. On page 8, ex-Kogi lawmaker jailed for 2 years for stealing 1.4 billion naira. And on page 9, malaria killed 400,000 persons in 2015, says WHO. And on the rider, on top of the mask there, on this very sad note, a 6 Ekiti doctor's driver perished in auto crash. That story is on page 8. The Buhari National Assembly panels to resolve budget grey areas. Stories on page 2. And finally, from the Punch newspaper on page 19, I'll run for presidency in 2019, says ex-governor Lamido. Mr. Daniels, let's start with the fuel crisis, because it's biting and hitting all of us more than ever before at this point. About this comment by Dr. Ibe Kachiku blaming fuel crisis on diversion to Cameroon and Chad, and then he's planning to track fuel trucks. Number one, Cameroon diversion has been on for a very long time. How come he's just realizing it now, almost 6-7 months after being appointed? And then why tracking fuel trucks is not rocket science, is not what we just started today. Everybody track their vehicles. How come he's just realizing, I think we need to track our trucks?
I love the fact that you did say that diversion isn't just coming up. I remember very vividly that I think it was in 2004, when the former president was going to increase fuel prices. It was on the heels of the fact that it was being diverted to the neighboring countries, and it wasn't sustainable that Nigeria would be paying the bills of neighboring countries. So you would have expected that since then some things would have been done about tracking trucks, but nothing has been done. And to think that the Ibe Kachuku will come tell us now, in 2016, that the reason we have problems with fuel is because it's been diverted. Well, I find it appalling, honestly, and I find it quite irresponsible, with due respect, that the Minister of State will tell us such things. Now, what does it take Nigerians for? Sometimes you wonder. Like you said, it's not rocket science. This is purely DPRS. You place the tracker in the truck. You know where the truck is going to.
You know where it is at every point in time.
You know exactly when the truck are diverted. And you can always call the driver. What exactly are you doing there? You understand? So you now come and you tell us all these cock and bull stories, and you expect us to take you seriously. I think we need to tell another story.
Okay, we're moving on now to the Guardian newspaper this morning, and it says Nigeria's fuel diverted to Chad. Cameroon says Kachuku with a rider. 2 riders actually. Fuel subsidy payment drops to 0. Ministers defend Buhari's government, urge patience. We have more of that story on page 6 of the Guardian newspaper. And on page 6 again, Saraki withdraws motion to stop trial at CCT. On page 5, we see children's footprints in Sambisa forest, says Army chief. Wow. Government National Assembly moved closer to signing 2016 budget. Buhari pleased with lawmakers revisiting fiscal plan. I think these are all the stories we have on the Guardian newspaper, and that particular story continues on page 7 of the Guardian newspaper. I wanted to talk about the Sambisa story, which is, it was like a punch in the heart to actually see that we have intelligence reports, reaching us that children's footprints are actually found in Sambisa forest. There's so much talk about this so-called forest.
It's massive. It's a very huge.
Yeah.
It is huge.
Children. Now, what is the implication of this, Mr. Yemidano?
I really don't get it. And today, government comes to tell us that there is no credible intelligence. Tomorrow, we come to tell us that
something different. Children. Now they're saying children.
Obviously, we do know that Chibok girls were not the first abduction. Set of abductees. And there have been several cases of that incident. Several cases.
Even after.
Yes, afterwards, and that we're hearing that we saw footprints. Well, it doesn't gladden the heart. It doesn't gladden the heart. It might also mean that some abductions just took place in Muslim times that we never heard of. You understand? So it's neither here nor there, and it might just be in the process of relocating the abductees. They needed to go by that way. The bottom line is this: that we have terrorism in our hands to contend with. And as we speak, there is no robust capacity on the part of the intelligence community to nip this strategy in the bud. Now, what's up for us? We have the Fulani herdsmen rearing their heads.
On rampage.
Now, when you put all of those things together, you see it's a nation under siege. You understand? You see a nation under siege. And to worsen the case, somebody somewhere is proposing a greasy reserve bill across the entire length and breadth of Nigeria. Now that tells us that they just want to serve us at the mercy of terrorists. Because as I speak to you, the Fulani herdsmen have been designated the number 4th terror group in the world.
Yes.
Now, if these guys are terrorists, if most of them have guns, firearms all over them, it's an indication that they are security threats and not just cattle rustlers.
Mr. Daniels, I was going to bring it up in the next newspaper, from the next newspaper, because it is a headline here. Let me just ask you, I've asked you this before. I was sitting on a keg of gunpowder. 1. 2, is this a form of an invasion? We seem to be fighting a war against Boko Haram. But somehow, somewhere, it is rearing its head in another form. These people are supposedly supposed to just be going about their daily normal business activities. But they're seen with guns, they're seen with grenades, they're seen with all sorts of ammunition. Are these people being infiltrated?
Wow, that's a tough one. And I do not want to agree that... well, I do not want to agree that they're just being infiltrated.
Why not?
The reason being that it's one case too many. If it was infiltration, it will be skirmishes.
Mr. Daniels, I lost a friend 2 days ago in Edo State, and reports reaching us is that he was actually killed by Fulani herdsmen. In Edo State.
So on Sunday, is this a form of, you just said that on Sunday, in Edo State,
on Sunday, he was actually found.
Should we still call them Fulani headsmen?
Because it's a new phase of terrorism in Nigeria. it might just be another strategy. We do not know if it's another strategy by Boko Haram to at least to change the landscape of the war. Because of course you cannot tell Fulani herdsmen not to do their job.
But these days they're going about in large numbers, 500.
Oh, yeah.
How many cows do they have?
You understand?
You would have
That's why you
500
say
men.
They're not just cattle. These are not Fulani herdsmen. It's not about infiltration. It's about the fact that some people took up a profession and decided to use that profession as a how do I put it? To disguise their criminality. So you don't call that infiltration.
So what should the Nigerian army do at this point?
Well, it's not Nigerian.
Or intelligence chiefs?
You see, I had expected much before now. But the truth, there is no capacity in the intelligence community. There is no capacity. My expectation was that so much capacity would have been built. If you need to sign bilateral relationships with some other people that could strengthen the capacity of the intelligence community, we might just have to just go that way. Okay. I don't know.
There's a lot involved that we cannot really handle on today's program.
Oh, yes.
Definitely.
All right, so I'm going to move on now to the Nation newspaper, and the screaming headline is Kachiku, petrol diverted to Chad, Cameroon, others. With the riders, Minister explains why shortage lingers. A government holds town hall meeting in Lagos. And Buhari consults Namani Masari with the rider. President seeks advice on budget. Masari continues on page 6. On page 42, 13 killed a suspected cultist clash. On page 7, court jails ex-lawmaker for 154 years. Court jails ex-lawmaker for 154 years. These stories are coming from the Nation newspaper. And on top of the mosque there, 800 houses to go for Lagos' 4th mainland bridge. The story is on page 44. On page 8, herdsmen kill 48 in attack on Enugu community. Still on page 8 of the Nation newspaper, appeal court, Saraki's Metu's Dasuki suits to go on. EFCC probes firm's payment of $6 million to SAN. And finally, from the Nation newspaper on page 9, protests in Ikiti over doctor's death in accident. Mr. Daniels.
So much to talk about.
So much to talk about.
I tell you.
Okay, I didn't read this story. I don't know if you read it, about the lawmaker being jailed for 154 years.
What did he do?
I heard it on the news. Briefly before I walked into the studio, and I was wondering what could have been the offense. Well,
154.
That's a long time.
It's not actually. We've seen people who were even jailed even in their deaths.
That's like a Methuselah verdict.
Oh yeah, more or less.
Methuselah verdict, I tell you.
Mr. Daniels, why are we still on the budget? Why is the budget not passed? Why are we almost stagnated as a nation?
Well, because people who are responsible would not shift their sword.
So this is a political.
You can't tell me. You see, it's just like a man and his wife when they have a crisis.
Okay.
And they won't tell you the real story.
You're talking about experience, Mr. Daniels. Okay, all right. From matrimony, we're going straight on now to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And it says, Fulani herdsmen invasion, men killed, 11 houses burned in Enugu community, residents flee to Nsukka. That is on the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. We have more story on page 2 of the paper. And above that story, 1.4 billion naira fraud. Court sentences Kogi ex-lawmaker to 154 years imprisonment. That story is coming from the Nigerian Tribune this morning. Buhari, Masari, Namani meet over 2016 budget. And on page 38, 6 African nations could be malaria-free by 2020. That is a report coming in. I will run for presidency under PDP in 2019, says Lamido. Ekiti declares 3 days mourning for dead medical doctors. Saboteurs diverting petrol to Chad, Cameroon, says Kachuku. Federal government requires 2 trillion naira to complete road projects, says Fashola. We have more of that story on page 10 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. So much stories trending. I want us to look at the statement made by Fashola. In another paper, he actually said there was no money whatsoever for road construction, for any form of improvement on the road. And of course, we saw what happened with the Ekiti doctors, the accident that happened. There's been so much protest in Ekiti. And as usual, the common man was hit. Yes, because we have patients in the hospital, the family is running helter-skelter because of this. Do you think this is welcoming? It is definitely not welcoming to me, but I really want you to react to the situation we have on ground.
I think it was J.F. Kennedy that says good economies do not make good roads. Rather, it's good roads that make good economies. So the question we should be asking ourselves, how good are the roads? For government to now say they do not want to spend money or much money on roads. Because up until now, that is the only means of transportation that is considerably developing. You understand? You know that the aviation sector isn't fully developed as we speak. The number of airlines are owing heavily, a real big time. So that seems to be the only means of transportation that has a semblance of development. I didn't say development, a semblance of development. And for government to say that they will not consolidate on such an infrastructure, I do not know where that thinking is.
If we need to put we need to practicalize what has just been said. What it means is the Lagos Ibadan Express Road will not be completed.
And what it also means that Lagos Apapa Expressway will remain the way it is. Oh, that's what it means.
So more trouble, more death on the highways.
You can say that again. But
but does that sound progressive?
That's what you just said. It doesn't. It's not progressive at all. Well, it doesn't. It's not.
We have APC is a progressive party, so we just whatever it is they're giving us, whether it's bad or good, it is progressive.
Oh, really? All right. So moving on to my next newspaper, New Telegraph. The leading headline is Fulani herdsmen invade Enugu, kill 20. With the riders, scouters kill schools in Kogi, Benue. Gunmen kidnap Catholic priests, demand 10 million naira ransom. That story continues on page 2. Above the mosque, 1.4 billion naira fraud. Ex-lawmaker bags 150 years jail term. That story is on page 43. I think we're beginning to have a sense of what happened.
1.4 million naira, right?
Billion naira.
1.4 billion.
On page 41, IPOB berates the federal government, AGF, over Kanu's detention. Father chains 35-year-old son for 2 months. That story is on page 9. On page 40, Fourth Mainland Bridge, Lagos to demolish 800 structures from the New Telegraph newspaper. And about the mosque there, $5.2 billion fine. MTN executives paid 537.3 million naira to leave. 30% fuel supplied by NNPC diverted, says Kachiku. The divided ministers to Nigerians. Please bear with Buhari. And finally, from the New Telegraph newspaper, 3.2 billion people are at risk of malaria globally, says the WHO.
Okay, the next paper is the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, and it says, budget impasse, Buhari National Assembly yet to close gaps. That is on the Daily Trust newspaper. Yuguda, $2.1 billion arms scam forced me out of PDP. TCN staff locked out as permanent secretary moves into headquarter building. We have more story on page 17 of the Daily Trust newspaper. And finally, we have the pictorial there of a House of Reps member, Mrakbo Oyemachi, who was allegedly slapped by a Nigerian prisons officer, and the man sitting right close to her is the perpetrator of that act. You have the next paper.
I have the Authority, and the leading headline is Fulani herdsmen invade Enugu community, scores feared dead, hundreds flee. The Authority newspaper. On page 4, anti-graft rights abuse crusade. Faceless groups target agencies for blackmail. Still on page 4, DSS officials set ablaze in Delta. On page 4 of the Authority newspaper. On page 45, Iheanacho rated best striker in Europe. And finally, from the Authority newspaper on page 2, Kanu Metu Dasuki's suit stalled at appeal court.
And moving on now to the Daily Sun newspaper, it says, our army generals shared arms funds with 2 riders. Presidential committee to unveil masterminds. Buhari may get report this week. That is on the Daily Sun newspaper. Fulani headsmen spilled blood in Enugu, killed 15. And more story on the Daily Sun. Juju allegation trails death of 6 Ekiti doctors in auto crash. With 1 rider protesting staff, CMD trade words. And on page 3, Fani Kayode Ozekome write for the Sun, and presidency, I'll challenge Buhari in 2019, says Lamido. You have the next one.
I have the final newspaper on my base, the Nigerian News Direct, and it says PDP rules Saraki, Kwakwaso, Atiku, Tambuwal. That story is on page 5. Above the mosque, fire me to deliver OAU a Dayemi lecture on Natural History Museum. That story is on page 4. Still on page 4, NNPC reform, Buhari, Tinubu in Cold War. On page 34, investigation why importers dump Nigerian ports for Cotonou. And on page 5, Union Bank shareholders invite EFCC. And still on page 5, 5,000 maritime workers to go. And finally, from the News Direct newspaper, there's a special report, top 50 technology-driven companies in Nigerian oil and gas industry.
And finally, also on my beat is a National Mirror newspaper. The National Mirror this morning says, harvest of death. 6 top doctors die in auto crash. Fulani headsmen massacres caused in Enugu. Cultists slaughter 13 in Kogi. These are the stories on the National Mirror newspaper. Ex-lawmakers meet Buhari over controversial 2016 budget. And on page 12, I'll run for presidency under PDP in 2019, says Lamido. Police arraigned 2 for stealing $14 million from church. Federal government lays constraints to power generation. That is on page 5. Assets declaration, appeal court nullifies Saraki's motion. And finally, Army Shiite clash, panel summons a depot commandant. We'll have more of that story on page 7 of the National Mirror. That is all the time we have on the newspaper review. But before we go in just 30 seconds, I want you to round up for us, Mr. Yemi Daniels.
Well,
your take on all the reports this morning.
Lamido simply flagged up the campaign for 2019.
3 years in advance.
You know what that means?
No.
Every other person.
Governance will suffer.
Of course. Every other thing around
everything
gets
is
affected.
Exactly. Everything will be subordinated. Wow. Unfortunately.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that's it on the newspaper review and analysis this morning. We want to thank Mr. Yemi Daniels for coming on the show this morning. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for
It's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. I will take a short break now. When we come back, we'll move straight into our topic of the day. The sun that has been making Anire and I